May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be always acceptable unto you, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer.
Amen.
Amen. Please be seated. You might remember that in some of our Eucharistic prayers, the prayers that the priest says at the altar as in consecrating the bread and the wine, it says that Jesus was at table with his friends. And I mentioned that because today's gospel reminds me that Peter and the other disciples, besides being disciples of Jesus, besides following him, besides looking to him as their teacher and their connection with God, they were also his friends. And I would think, perhaps, in this passage that we heard today from Mark, when Jesus is teaching his disciples that the Son of Man needs to go and suffer many things and be rejected. And then Peter began to rebuke, admonish, correct, argue with. And is that not a very human reaction to hearing our friend say that he is going to suffer and be killed? If you think that they could avoid it. And then Jesus, turning about and looking at his disciples, admonished Peter and says, "Get behind me, accuser, because you think not the things of God, but those of men." Satan, accuser. In the Old Testament, the Hebrew was ha-Satan, and footnote points out that it uses the definite article because the designation indicates a function and not a proper name. The word Satan is a person, thing, or set of circumstances that constitutes an obstacle or frustrates one's purposes. I don't think that Jesus is accusing Peter of being Satan in the medieval Christian sense of the great and evil force that opposes God, but in the earlier sense, one who frustrates God's purposes, frustrates one's purposes. In the book of Job, Satan is a figure, part of God's heavenly court, whose role is to tempt people and test them. In the beginning of the Gospels, after Jesus' baptism, says that he was driven out into the wilderness for 40 days and tempted by Satan. Here, Jesus rejects what Peter says, rejects Peter in Peter's actions in tempting Jesus from the path that Jesus believes God has laid out for him. I wonder, have you ever said to a friend, "Get behind me, Satan"? Or maybe you haven't used those words, But maybe you have had a friend sometime in your life who tempted you to do something that you knew was not according to God's plan for you. And you said no. I actually have used those words once, sort of in jest. After I made the decision to leave the practice of law and see if I was discerned to have a vocation for ordained ministry, a former mentor of mine offered me a job that a year before, I would have loved that. He was the author of a treatise on international taxation, and he invited me to be a co-author with him. Like I said, if he had made that offer a year before, I would have loved at it, and I probably would not be standing here today. But I had decided that God was calling me to the ministry. And so I said, "Get behind me, Satan." We both laughed because his father had been a minister, and so he recognized the reference. It's easy from the standpoint of the one who feels that they know the path that they are called to walk, to put aside the voices of their friends tempting them off that path. But what about the friend? What about Peter and the other disciples who have to choose between maybe abandoning Jesus or walking with him on this very painful path? I think all of us have people that we love who we see struggling in one way or another. Maybe they have a very difficult medical condition. Maybe they are more aware of their death, their future death, than we usually are. Because of course, as Ash Wednesday reminded us, we are all on a journey to death. As the saying goes, none of us gets out of this life alive. But sometimes our mortality taps us on the shoulder, or taps on the shoulder of the person we love. How are we a good friend? How can we do better than Peter? Perhaps this sermon should be titled, "How Not to Be Satan." Because one thing we can do is we can refrain from arguing with our friend. You know, if they tell us, "I just went to the doctor and I'm going to be doing X," maybe having surgery, we can refrain from saying, "Well, I read on the internet that you don't have to do X." We can refrain from saying, "Oh, my grandmother did X and that was really bad." We cannot argue with them. If they put trust in us, as Jesus put trust in his disciples and sharing with them how he was discerning what his future was going to be and the ordeal that he would undergo we can accept that confidence. We can be honored that they have chosen to share with us. We can accept. They're not asking for a committee vote here. Jesus was not saying to his friends, I think God is telling me that I should go to Jerusalem where I'm going to be crucified. What do you all think? Our friend needs our support, not our argument. There is a very helpful visual of concentric circles. When someone is suffering, when someone is having a hard time, when someone is perceiving a difficult road ahead of them, or perhaps they are in that difficult road, they need to be able to reach for support to their circle closest to them. That immediate circle then needs to be able to reach for support to the people in the next concentric circle. It goes outward. It doesn't come inward. The person who is supporting someone who is experiencing a really hard time does not need the person in the outer concentric circle to come to them and say, oh, I'm feeling so bad about your so-and-so. How are they doing? No. The people most affected get to choose when and how they reach for support. And we all, as we are further away, honestly, we have to handle our own feelings. It's not up to them to make us feel better. We can handle our own feelings with prayer. We can handle our own feelings by maybe talking to the people that we know and love who are further away from the situation. Some of you know that my mother was recently put on hospice, and I am reaching out to the people who are in my support, most immediate support network for support. I have a therapist who I talk to. I have friends who are priests who I talk to. I don't know what my friends do with the information that I dump on them. They probably, the priest ones probably turn it to God in prayer. My therapist probably talks to her wife. You each have people in your lives that you depend on. And there are people who depend on you. Jesus was trying to depend on his friends. And Peter was not helpful at that moment. But then Peter went with Jesus, went with him to Jerusalem. He denied him at the very end, as we know. But Jesus forgave him. We know that Peter loved Jesus because after the resurrection, Jesus said to Peter, do you love me? And Peter said, you know I love you. And Jesus said, feed my sheep. Each of us can feed God's sheep by listening when we are honored with a confidence by not burdening the person closer to the situation with our feelings or what we learned on the internet, or, wanting to. Peter didn't say, just how do you think you're going to suffer, Jesus? Do you think they're going to flog you? Because that's very painful. How do you feel about that? No. He let Jesus decide how much he wanted to share. This is sort of, I know this is anachronistic. I'm getting into sort of modern psychology and pastoral care, and for some of you, this is stuff that you learned years ago. And for others, you may think, how does this relate to the Bible? But besides being a group of Bible studiers, we are a group of friends. And so it's always worth thinking and talking about, what does it mean to be friends? What does it mean to be a Christian community of love and mutual support? You all are pretty good at that. But I find it helpful sometimes for myself to remember concentric circles, to remember that when someone confides in me, it's not my task to fix it. It's not my task to share my experiences. It's my task to listen, to turn to God in prayer, maybe to share with one of the people who supports me. So I think that it's helpful to look at the example of Peter and Jesus as friends, with Jesus facing knowledge of his mortality, his passion, and Peter dealing with that news.